New York, the city that never sleeps, where skyscrapers glow against the night sky, pulsing with life. Inside Le Grand, one of the city's most luxurious hotels, Naomi Carter walked through the grand lobby, the soft click of her flats barely audible on the marble floor. At 25, Naomi had mastered the art of existing between two worlds, the opulent realm of the wealthy guests she served and the reality of her own life, where rent and bills dictated her every move. As a dedicated front desk associate, she knew her role well: be polite, be professional, but never get too close. She never expected that one fateful night would change everything. Ethan Sinclair, 32, a renowned architect, had just returned to New York after 7 years abroad. While waiting for renovations on his penthouse to be completed, he had chosen to stay at Le Grand, hoping to study its design and draw inspiration for his upcoming restoration project on a historic landmark. But on his very first night in the hotel, he would encounter something, or rather, someone, that would alter the course of his life forever. The night shift at Le Grand dragged on slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. Though quieter than the daytime rush, the hotel still catered to high-profile guests with special requests. Naomi handled the last of the evening's check-ins, ensuring everything was in order before her shift ended. As midnight approached, she entered the presidential suite for a final inspection. The room was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of New York City. But Naomi barely noticed. Her feet ached from standing for over 10 hours. "Just a minute," she murmured, lowering herself onto the edge of the bed. The plush mattress enveloped her, and within seconds, exhaustion claimed her. An hour later, Ethan Sinclair stepped into the suite. It had been a long day of meetings, and all he wanted was a quiet night's rest. But as he flicked on the lights, he froze. Someone was asleep on his bed. Ethan frowned, stepping closer. The young woman wore a hotel uniform, her dark curls slipping loose from their neat hold. She lay curled up, her hand clutching a silver locket that glinted under the dim lighting. He could call the front desk. He should call the front desk. But something stopped him. She looked exhausted. Sighing, Ethan shrugged off his jacket and gently draped it over her. Then, settling into the armchair across the room, he opened his laptop, stealing glances at the stranger sleeping in his bed. He didn't know who she was, but one thing was certain: she wasn't supposed to be here. Morning light filtered through the towering windows, casting golden hues across crisp white sheets. Naomi stirred, warmth surrounding her as she slowly woke. And then she froze. This wasn't her room, and she definitely wasn't supposed to be here. She bolted upright, her wide eyes scanning the luxurious suite. Then she saw him. Ethan Sinclair sat in the armchair near the window, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, watching her with an expression that was far too amused for her liking. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice smooth and deep. Naomi's heart pounded. I can explain," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. A heavy jacket slipped from her shoulders onto the bed. Ethan set his coffee down, lips curving into a smirk. "You performed a very thorough quality check of the bed. I assume it meets your standards?" Naomi's face burned. "I didn't mean to, I was just exhausted." Ethan folded his arms. "You were so overworked that you fell asleep in a guest suite? That's a little concerning." Shame washed over her. "I'm so sorry, I should go." Ethan studied her for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Have you had breakfast yet?" Naomi blinked. "What? Breakfast?" He gestured to the tray on the coffee table. "I ordered more than I needed. Since you've already, let's say, made yourself at home, you might as well eat something." She hesitated, but there was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. For the first time, she met his gaze fully. And at that moment, she realized this wasn't just a chance encounter. Naomi couldn't remember the last time she had a proper breakfast. As she picked up the warm croissant from the tray, her hesitation slowly faded. Across from her, Ethan stirred his coffee leisurely, his gray eyes studying her with quiet curiosity. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. Naomi took a sip of tea before answering. 2 years. But I've been in hospitality since college. Ethan nodded, his gaze briefly flickering to the silver locket around her neck. Does your necklace mean something special? Naomi instinctively touched the pendant. My mother gave it to me when I left home for New York. She said as long as I had it, I'd never feel alone. Ethan was silent for a moment, as if weighing his words. Then he offered a small smile. She must be an incredible woman. Naomi nodded. She's the strongest person I know. The air between them shifted. No longer just a guest and a hotel employee, but two people sharing something real, something unspoken. As Naomi stood to leave, Ethan suddenly asked, "If you could do anything, what would it be?" She hesitated, caught off guard. "I'd want to be a hotel manager. To work in places like LeGrand, but not just behind the front desk. To actually run things." Ethan nodded. "I think you'd be great at it." The simplicity of his words, the quiet sincerity, stayed with her for the rest of the day. And she didn't realize that, from that moment on, Ethan would always notice her just a little bit more. 3 days later, Naomi still couldn't shake the memory of their breakfast conversation. Every time she walked past the presidential suite, she found herself hesitating for a fraction of a second, wondering if he was inside. It was ridiculous, really. He was just a guest, and she was just a hotel employee. So why did his words keep replaying in her mind? That night, after finishing her shift, Naomi walked past the hotel bar and saw Ethan sitting alone. He was swirling a glass of whiskey, his gaze distant as he watched the city lights flicker through the massive windows. She hadn't planned on stopping, but then Ethan looked up and caught her gaze. "Do you have a minute?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded. She slid into the seat beside him, accepting the cup of tea he had already ordered for her. "You look tired," she observed. Ethan let out a soft chuckle. "There's a lot on my mind these days." Naomi tilted her head. "The building you're designing?" He nodded. "And coming back to New York. After 7 years away, I'm not sure I belong here anymore." Naomi was quiet for a moment before saying, "I know that feeling. Sometimes I wonder if I really belong here too." Ethan studied her, his expression unreadable. "Then why do you stay?" Naomi smiled softly, fingers brushing her locket. "Because I haven't found a reason to leave yet." In that moment, without saying a word, they both understood. Maybe, just maybe, they had found something worth staying for. In the days that followed, Naomi and Ethan continued to cross paths, sometimes by chance, sometimes by choice. A nod in the morning, a passing smile as she worked, a cup of tea delivered to her station on particularly hectic nights. But then, one day, everything shifted. Naomi had just finished her shift when she received a message from Ethan. "I'm leaving the hotel soon. Can I see you for a minute?" Her heart sank. She knew he wouldn't be here forever, but she hadn't prepared herself for the moment he would actually leave. She found him in a quiet corner of the lobby, his suitcase by his side. When he saw her, he stood, offering her a soft but hesitant smile. "I'm finally moving into my apartment," Ethan said. Naomi nodded, keeping her voice even. "So you won't be at LeGrand anymore." Ethan slid his hands into his pockets, hesitating before saying, "I'm just not sure if I want to leave." The words hung between them, unspoken but heavy. Naomi felt a tightness in her chest, but she wasn't sure what to say. Then Ethan simply smiled. "We'll see each other again, won't we?" She didn't know the answer, but she hoped so. 3 days had passed since Ethan left the hotel, but Naomi still hadn't adjusted to his absence. There was no more finding him at the bar late at night, no more unexpected cups of tea waiting at her station. One afternoon, as she was checking the front desk records, an envelope was delivered to her. There was no return address, only a simple inscription: Naomi Carter, LeGrand Hotel. Her heartbeat quickened as she tore it open. Inside was a card, handwritten in familiar, neat script. "My new apartment has the perfect view of the city. Would you like to come watch the sunset with me?" A key was tucked inside. Naomi held it in her palm, a mix of hesitation and excitement swirling within her. She could say no. She could go on with her life the way it was. But for the first time in a long while, her heart was telling her something else. And that night, she found herself standing at Ethan's door, ready for a new beginning. Naomi stood outside Ethan's apartment, gripping the key tightly. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her chest. This wasn't just a visit. This was a choice. She took a deep breath and knocked. Within seconds, the door swung open and Ethan stood there. He wasn't in his usual tailored suits, but a simple sweater, his hair slightly tousled as if he had rushed to answer the door. He looked at her, surprised, before his lips curved into a soft smile. "You came." Naomi swallowed, then nodded. "You invited me, didn't you?" Ethan stepped aside, letting her in. His apartment was spacious but cozy, the golden hues of the sunset spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. Naomi walked toward the window, gazing out at the city. From here, New York didn't seem as overwhelming as before. Ethan moved beside her, watching her carefully. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." Naomi let out a small laugh. "I wasn't sure either, but then I realized, sometimes the best things happen when we take a step forward." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment, then murmured, "I'm really glad you did." And as the sun dipped below the skyline, Naomi knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, Naomi and Ethan's relationship settled into an effortless rhythm, not rushed, not dramatic, but filled with moments of quiet sweetness and unexpected laughter. Ethan, who had spent years immersed in blueprints and high-stakes meetings, now found joy in life's simple pleasures, like waiting for Naomi after her shift just to walk her part of the way home. He always had a funny story about a demanding client or a bizarre construction mishap, making her laugh even on her most exhausting days. "You know," Naomi mused one evening as they stood in line for donuts at a street vendor, "every time I saw you walk into the hotel, I had to pretend I wasn't paying attention." Ethan turned to her with a smirk. "Oh yeah? And here I thought you were too busy testing out presidential suite beds." Naomi shot him a glare but couldn't suppress her grin. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" Ethan feigned deep thought. I don't know, but I do think it's one of the best things to ever happen at that hotel." Naomi burst out laughing, amazed at how something that once embarrassed her had now become an inside joke between them. But love wasn't just about shared laughter. It was in the little ways Ethan showed he cared. On nights Naomi worked late, he would send her a simple text, "Don't forget your tea." When she complained about not having time to read, he surprised her with a book she had once mentioned in passing. One evening, as Naomi stepped into Ethan's apartment, she noticed something different. On his massive bookshelf, previously filled with architecture and design books, there was now a small section just for her favorite novels. She turned to him, narrowing her eyes. "What exactly is this?" Ethan shrugged innocently. "I figured if you keep forgetting to bring a book when you come over, I might as well have a few here. That way, you don't have an excuse to leave too soon." Naomi didn't say anything, just shook her head with a smile. And when Ethan pulled her into his arms, she knew she had found a place where she truly belonged. Not in a hotel, not in a luxurious apartment, but with someone who made space for her in his world, no matter how small or large. A year had passed since Naomi stood at Ethan's apartment door, choosing to step into his world, a year of shared mornings over coffee, late-night city strolls, spontaneous getaways, and playful arguments over whose turn it was to do the dishes. Their love had deepened, not just a fleeting romance, but something real and lasting. And tonight, Ethan was ready to make it forever. Naomi received his message. "I have something special for you. Meet me at Le Grand Presidential Suite, 8 p.m. She frowned. "Le Grand? Why there?" But the moment she stepped inside, she understood. The suite was breathtaking. Candles flickered across the room, their soft glow illuminating the deep red velvet curtains. The floor was covered in rose petals arranged in the shape of a heart, and at the center of it stood Ethan, dressed in a sharp suit, his gray eyes shining with love. Naomi gasped as he knelt before her, revealing a small velvet box. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had prepared every detail, yet now, Looking up at the woman who had completely changed his life, he felt like a nervous teenager again. What if she said no? What if she wasn't ready? But then she met his gaze. Eyes wide, shimmering with tears, and he knew before she even spoke. "Naomi," he said, voice steady yet filled with emotion. "1 year ago, you walked into my life in the most unexpected way, and from that moment I knew I never wanted to spend another day without you. You are not just the woman I love. You are my home." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes as Ethan opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" A tearful laugh escaped her lips. Without hesitation, she nodded. "Yes. Yes, I will." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a deep, passionate kiss, a kiss filled with love, devotion, and the promise of forever. That night, they didn't leave the suite. In the very room where they had first met, they made love, sealing their fate not just in words, but in heart and soul. Their wedding took place in a beautiful garden surrounded by loved ones. Naomi was radiant in white, and Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. As they exchanged vows, Ethan whispered, "I've been waiting for this moment forever." Naomi smiled. "Me too." When they kissed, the world erupted in applause, marking the beginning of their forever. 3 months later, one morning, Naomi stood before Ethan, holding out a pregnancy test. 2 clear lines. "Ethan," she whispered, "I'm pregnant." Ethan froze. Then, as the realization sank in, his eyes welled with tears. "Are you serious?" His voice trembled. Naomi nodded, smiling through her own tears. "We're going to be a family." Ethan stared at the test in Naomi's hand, his breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to tilt for a moment, as if reality itself had just shifted. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, utterly speechless. Naomi watched him, a small flicker of nervousness crossing her face. "Ethan?" she whispered. And then, as if the realization finally hit him, Ethan let out a shaky laugh. Half disbelief, half pure joy. His eyes burned with unshed tears as he cupped her face gently, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "We're having a baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe it." Naomi laughed. "We should start decorating the nursery." Ethan kissed her forehead. "I'll build you a whole castle if you want." And as he held her close, she knew she hadn't just found love, she had found home.